Thank you so much for that great introduction. And again, welcome everyone. I have the privilege and the honor of introducing two of my colleagues, friends, familia, I would say co-conspirators, and more important, colleagues. And so with that in mind, let me just quickly share what I do. So I'm at the Association of American Medical Colleges, and what that means really is that I hope to amplify your voice. I really want to bring in your expertise, whether it's serving on an advisory committee or a committee, and really bringing your assets. I think that's very important that Dr. Sanchez highlighted as he began. You all bring different assets, and it's we are far from accepting that there are no Latino, Latinas, or LHS plus individuals with expertise. And so with that in mind, let me introduce my colleague, Doctora Norma Paul Hunter, who is the Senior Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Diversity Workforce at the AAMC. And of course, I think our colleague, Dr. Sanchez, already introduced himself, but I want to take the time to reintroduce himself, or introduce him, I should say. So I want to make sure I don't mess this up. So he is the Executive Director for the Latino Medical Student Association, Interim Executive Diversity Officer for the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, Executive Associate Vice President for the Health Science Center in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the University of New Mexico, and Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. And I did that to make a point because over the years, I realized that it is very common for you all to hold multiple titles, not just one. And as you are beginning in your career, whether you're an instructor, assistant, associate, or professor, I've noticed how much over time that your institutions will come to you to capitalize on your assets. And it's important to recognize those from the beginning of your career in academic medicine and how to really advance your career. And so we're here to support you. With that in mind, just a couple of housekeeping notes before I turn it over. Please use the chat to ask questions. I will be monitoring the chat. In addition to just asking questions, I will try to put in some resources using links. So access to information that you may already know or it may be new to you. And the last thing I will say is, please don't be shy. We're among family and we're happy to support each of you here today. So with that in mind, I turn it over to Doctora Paul Hunter.
Gracias, Juan. It's wonderful to see all of you. So many familiar faces and get to know many of you who are new to LMSA, to Líderes. So welcome on behalf of ANC. This is so important for us to be part of this conversation to really help to set the tone along with JP on what is critical for us to know about representation of LHS plus community and how we take that data to really look at systems change. And so it's my pleasure to be with you here, and I'm going to start to share my slides. So I'll be kicking things off for us. So Juan, if you could confirm for me that you are seeing those, that would be great. Are we good? Okay, perfect. So we're here to really set the tone, as I mentioned, to talk about why we need LHS plus identified faculty and leaders in academic medicine. Of course, we always have to start with our objectives. You know, what is it that we're trying to communicate with you today, to impress upon you, to help hopefully ignite the fire in terms of why this is so important for us to convene and continue to stay connected with one another. So we want to describe the data in terms of like representation in academic medicine, in academia overall, in the population, talk about the benefits of inclusion of Latino voices, and also review the challenges in many cases. So when we look at representation, for many, probably like for 20 years, we've been hearing in the US, Latinos are going to take over, they're going to increase significantly, whether it was through immigration or through new births and birth rates continuing to increase. But this slide is mostly important to show the diversity that exists within the LHS plus community, right? We all come from various ethnic groups and backgrounds and cultural heritages, and it's so critical to be able to speak to that diversity. And many times, unfortunately, many individuals who don't know the LHS plus community don't realize that there's so many more individuals and countries that are represented with respect to the community. And so this is always a nice reminder to say we're very diverse. We come from different histories in terms of migration and immigration with regards to language, and also all the intersectionalities that exist for us in the United States by sex, gender, race, ethnicity, economic status, and so by ability. So there's just a lot. We're not a monolith, and I think this is what the point is here. Also, too, how we see ourselves in the nation varies significantly with respect to our country of origin, our place. There was a great study that showed that on Latina faculty that it just depends on who I'm talking to and where I am. So if I am in New York, I'll say I'm Boricua from the Bronx. If I am in a place where people don't, it's not, maybe I'll say I'm Puerto Rican American, or, first generation Puerto Rican, or I might just say I'm Latina. And so really a lot of our identity often has to do with kind of our place, the context where we are, and when we're being asked about who we are, right? And so we see that there, based on Pew Research, this also varies. And oftentimes, we have this term Latinx that's often being popularized, and we see that the majority of everyday people have not even heard of Latinx. So it speaks to how within academia, we can come up with different names, and there's also Latina, but that kind of when we look at the population, the general population, there's still not this resonance necessarily with Latinx as kind of a descriptor for our communities. And this changes again across various racial ethnic groups, as well as kind of time generations in the United States. And so when LMSA in particular is kind of going out front and saying, we want to be inclusive of these various names that we could use to kind of describe our community, and this idea of using LHS plus, which sometimes is a tongue twister, as you can see, is important for us to just be inclusive. So what is our representation in academia overall? So this data here represents 2-year, 4-year institutions, graduate programs, really all of individuals who identify as faculty across our universities in the United States. And what's important here is for us to look at not only the total, so in this case, we look at they're all purple, but the little bit of a kind of lavender, dark lavender color here, where we see that LHS plus males are 3% of faculty, and then women also represent 3% of the total faculty. When we look across levels and ranks, we see that representation is much heavier in the earlier ranks as compared to when we go up kind of faculty ranks to professor, where Latina women are significantly underrepresented here at 1%. When we look at occupations in the health professions, we see that physicians represent 6.3%, Latino physicians of all physicians in the United States. But when we look across the health professions, which is important to see here, is that representation is, some may be surprised, we're actually higher than some others, but really we're probably like in the middle compared to, it's like PAs are leading us in terms of Latino representation, followed by dietitians. And these are what we call the health diagnosing and treating practitioner occupations, which tend to require advanced graduate education. So 6.3% based on HRSA data in 2017. When we look at AMC data for work in our workforce studies unit, we recently released this data snapshot that showed that about 6% of practicing physicians identify as Hispanic, Latinx, Latino. Of that group, 43% were born in the US. So we see that most of our physicians are actually born who identify as LHS plus, were actually born outside of the United States. So I think that's interesting conversation for us to think about in terms of the idea of growing our own in the United States. Obviously, immigration has so many more benefits, but also thinking about, is this causing a brain drain potentially in some of our countries of origin? But for those who identify as US born, you see here on the right, the breakdown by ethnic groups. The majority identifying as Mexican American, the second largest group Cuban, and followed by from Puerto Rico. And so you see the other groups here, which is a nice way because oftentimes, again, we talk about kind of, the LHS plus community as a monolith, and this gives us a little bit more of a disaggregation of our community. So what does that mean when we talk about the purpose that we're here today to support faculty? We see here that we do have a lot of work to be done. We look at men who identify as LHS plus, about 3,500 or so, women, nearing 3,000 in terms of representation. And so out of 191,000 faculty. So sometimes we show the percentages, but the numbers are so important, right, to look at in terms of really understanding what that representation means. When we look at faculty ranks, again, across the board, we see that as we go from right to left, instructor, but assistant professor, we're primarily concentrated at that rank. And then a significant drop, more than half to associate. And then we have the professor level. And this is the type of data that brings us here, right? This is why Líderes is so critical with respect to helping to navigate the pathway up through the ranks in academic medicine. When we look at department chairs, we have some data here with regards to representation. They're again saying that we still have a lot more work to be done. In some cases, we have 0 men or women. But when we look at the clinic in terms of basic sciences, we have other departments, but then the clinical sciences, you see, for example, in anesthesiology, there's no representation at all. And as well as, 0 women in many of these other departments here. In physical medicine and rehabilitation, only 1, and in other clinical sciences. So, I'll sit here for a minute with this data because this is very important for our conversation, right? Throughout this conference, is to really understand what does it mean, when we think about chairs of departments and not to have that representation of LHS plus identified individuals. What does it mean not only for the climate and culture of our institutions, but what does it mean in terms of access to care, the integration of culturally responsive curriculum? There's so many impacts of not having that representation.
Dr. Paul
Yes.
Hunter, there was a comment in the chat box that
Mhm.
many of the leaders on that prior page are actually from the 4 medical schools in Puerto Rico. Can you give commentary on whether we've been able to disaggregate by the faculty and senior leaders in the 4 medical schools there versus the 151 medical schools in the mainland?
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. Shout out to our schools in Puerto Rico because they definitely are more highly represented in terms of this represents all of our MD granting institutions, but obviously there was some earlier work done by Campbell that showed that if you were to remove the schools in Puerto Rico and the schools, the HBCUs, for example, our numbers would be significantly low as it relates to not only students, but faculty, as well as leadership positions. And we'll see that a little bit more as well when we look at kind of the dean's data. Here, so there's definitely a lot more work to be done. And yes, we have to disaggregate that data. And so, hopefully in future meetings, we can do that to demonstrate that impact. The data that we have publicly available focuses on bringing together the URIM, so underrepresented in medicine, which in this case means the Hispanic, Latino, African American, American Indian, and Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander physicians who serve, or others that serve in dean roles. These are the medical school deans. And so here you see over time, we have had some increases, but it's been very slow. So if you look at the line with the dark blue boxes, those are all the URM deans combined. So that means permanent deans and interim acting deans. But if we look at the light blue with the circle, that shows the actual number of underrepresented minority permanent deans. And you see that since 1992 to 2021, it really has not changed significantly. We have seen some increases, it looks like starting in 2008, but then there have been some dips along the way. So all of this to say that there's a lot of opportunity to increase our voice and our representation at that level. And so this is another slice. It's an older study, but at least it gets a little bit more in detail with respect to the deans at that time, over a 12-year study by you, showing, again, the significant underrepresentation for our community. And so this is the work. I have to credit Dr. Sanchez, in terms of really pulling out this work. This is what it looked like in 2019. And I think, in 2022, this is what representation looks like. And again, if we were to go back to 2019, the majority are from schools in Puerto Rico, right? We have our 4 Puerto Rican schools. And then here, again, the majority are from the schools of Puerto Rico, with the exception here right now of interim dean, Juan Sandan. So now I'll pass it over to Dr. Sanchez to talk a little bit about, what the research is telling us. What have we learned based on our experiences about what factors influence an individual's trajectory to a faculty career?
Dr. Paul Hunter. So just want to take a moment and get any reflections on what you've just noticed. Those numbers are quite significant. And I think I mentioned that when LMSA was started in 1972, it was to address discrimination and health disparities or inequities, not only in the community, but also within our academic centers. So we are here today to continue in addressing that vision and mission for the organization. Would anyone like to share any reflections on what Dr. Paul Hunter has shared, or ask her any hard questions? Because I always turn to Dr. Paul Hunter and Mr. Amador and Dr. Acosta. They are our 3 of many LHS leaders in the AAMC, but just wanted to give a pause because those stats may be heavy for many of us. Any additional comments in the chat box, or just unmute yourself?
So Dr. Sanchez, there was a question, I wanted to read it. Is there a pipeline program for URM deans? The AMC mid-level program for URMs somewhat does, but not, are there other opportunities? The other opportunity that I want to highlight, once you get to, I believe, more of a senior level, the AMC does have the Council of Deans Fellowship, which is a program where it's an application based, and if you aspire to be a dean, you would apply, and then you're paired up with a current dean, and then you have access to attend the Council of Dean meetings. You have mentoring and sponsoring opportunities. We are seeing some of our colleagues go through that program. So a current example is Dr. Archana Chatterjee in Chicago. She went through that program. There are other programs that also I think are very helpful to helping you get to the next leadership level. I can think of at Drexel, the ELAM program. While it's not, within the AMC, we certainly partner and collaborate to really make sure that everyone's aware of that women's executive leadership program.
I think those are excellent suggestions, Juan. And I think the commonality between both of those programs, at least in my mind, but it would be good to hear your thoughts and individuals who have been submitted for both of those programs. You sort of have to be pre-selected by your leadership, and you're sort of already viewed as being promoted to a next level. So in my experience of the 3 institutions I've been at, people that have been put forth for ELAM are exceptional, but often senior leadership was already planning to give them a higher position. So it almost is sort of a transition to give them protected time to develop maybe an expanded niche, but they were already sort of expected to be afforded a new title. I am making an assumption that the AAMC Dean's program that you mentioned would also, through that application, might also bear that weight. For an individual who maybe isn't already sitting in the C-suite, I think there aren't many programs to really afford a person new knowledge, skills, and networking without already being sort of blessed. To that, though, I would say, and going back to one of Dr. Paul Hunter's slides, most deans of a medical school have been either a chair of a department or a full professor, or both. So it's very difficult, I think, to be a competitive applicant to be the dean of a medical school without having served in achieving professor level or having served a chair of a department. But it would be great to hear others' thoughts on that.
Can I share my personal experience that just happened to me last year? So my institution made the announcement that they were soliciting applications from faculty who wanted to attend at 2 different times a leadership conference. This is organized through the AAMC. And so I applied. And the first time I applied, there was a deadline. And so I had a problem with my chair. He didn't put in the letter in time, so I missed the deadline to register. So fine. Then another time I applied for another opportunity. This time the school sent the solicitation too close to the deadline. So then I was selected again, but then it was sold out. So I couldn't register. So I don't know, given those 2 instances where I was not unable to attend, do I feel encouraged to do it again for next year? I don't know. So I feel like there has to be maybe more opportunities, maybe increase the number of workshops, because they seem to be very attractive to a lot of institutions. But I think there's a problem in, 1, not having enough openings for many people to attend, and 2, at the level of the institution, that they don't act in time to get, to get everything in place so that a faculty member can attend.
Anna, let me just share with you that, first, apologies for all that, but I highly encourage you to not give up, to apply. And now, prior to us starting the event, I logged in early and I met you, and I'm happy to help you navigate the process. It is not common for us to, not have room the pandemic has, not to make any excuses, has just turned everything upside down. And what we have seen over the last 2 years, that the virtual components of any conference that we're putting out is just highly subscribed and oversubscribed. So the demand and supply sometimes is not there, but we take your experience very seriously in terms of, so thank you for sharing that with us, because I will be sharing that with the AMC, my colleagues, my program staff colleagues. And I want to take Cristina, I see your question in terms of, how is the AMC, or how are we keeping up with issues for LHS plus physicians? Are we doing focus groups, or how are we doing that? And I want to, invite my colleague, Dr. Paul Hunter, to share, some of the works that through the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit that we've been doing to be more aligned and hear and integrate more of the concerns and voices from our community.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I second these things. In order to improve the statistics, we need to start from the bottom and have more access to resources. So just a quick story. My nephew is looking to go into medicine. He's just, he is in high school, starting young, and just looking into pipeline programs, anything, it's so hard to find. I kind of, now that I'm a fellow at USC right now, like, even with my knowledge, finding a program, it's really hard. So imagine someone who doesn't have that kind of support. So I think having a place where we can have all these resources, all those programs available to us, to the community, say well, go to this website and you'll find all the grants that are being given to, to Hispanics or minorities, or what pipelines programs are available, because it's just so hard to navigate. The internet is so vast and there's so many things around, but the deadlines are very short. Sometimes, I find a program came up and I have 2 weeks to apply for it. So I think having, a centralized system to help us help our community will be very helpful. I don't know if anyone else has any kind of idea, or if there's something in place like that.
I think that would be great to have, Hugo. My university has some of those programs in place, but even the students who are, who are undergrads don't even know of these opportunities. Sometimes they find out because they talk to a faculty member who knew about information regarding these programs. And I don't think we have we haven't really worked hard on creating such a database, because I think it's by institution.
Well, I think, going back to both of your points, and going to what Juan mentioned, that the AAMC has a strategic plan. I'm just gonna elaborate on the strategic plan, Juan, because I know we've spoken quite a bit, that it does not explicitly mention a focus on students who are LHS plus. There's explicit mention of students of Native American background and African American background, but it does not explicitly mention LHS plus. So I do think that this is potentially an opportunity, and you might already have it on the AAMC website, to have a listing of those pre-med programs stratified by racial, ethnic identity, or sexual orientation, or gender, because I think more and more of those programs do pop up. Also mentioning that LMSA does have LMSA Plus, which is specifically for pre-meds, and that's associated with each LMSA chapter. But once again, that's psychosocial support, academic preparation. It's not scholarships. Mi Mentor is a web-based platform for people to be connected with role models and mentors. And so there are a lot of programs, and I think absolutely it's about connecting our community with these great programs. I just want to transition us because I think everyone is bringing up the very things on this slide right here. And I'm grateful because I was introduced to this slide by Dr. Eve Higginbotham, who is I believe, the vice president of DI at UPenn College of Medicine, and we're in her hometown. But it's a play off of Dr. Satcher's framework on social determinants of health. She rephrased it as social or determinants of health in academia, which I know we can all take to heart. We are at the center of the individual level. Sometimes our biology works against us, which ties to many of the isms, but we can also embrace how our lived experiences give us great, unique assets. And we're going to be talking more about that, as well as the behaviors that we undertake to allow ourselves to be more successful in this promotion journey. We know that the physical environment and social environment can also be positive or negative, and it's very much the policies and interventions that contribute to those disparities that you notice that really haven't changed over the past 50 years. And accessing quality mentors, role models, and sponsors are critical. So just in terms of this room, and I think I've mentioned to many of you, you can add me to write you a letter of recommendation. And already, since July, many of you have gone up for promotion. And by not surprised, I have received emails from your chair saying, so-and-so is going up for promotion. Would you be willing to review their portfolio and write a letter? That is what this is about. Similarly, I encourage you to invite many of the people that you're hearing from today and meeting today as speakers for your departments, also inviting them to apply for jobs at your institution. Next slide.
JP, I'd like to share something that speaks
Sure.
to this diagram here. It's interesting. There's a lot of research that's been done within higher education broadly, and I say a lot by a handful. I'm being a little sarcastic on the experiences of LHS plus faculty. A lot of it is based on faculty who are in education, but I wanted to share this one, what they call a testimonio, because they're using qualitative methods to speak to understanding the experience. And in this case, it's two Latino faculty. And I wanted to read this because I think it speaks to some of the challenges, but also kind of what might be what we need to do differently as well with not only representation, but kind of changing the culture of our institutions. So it says, given the low numbers of Latina faculty across academia, I assumed that my value would extend beyond a diversity statistic. Although much needed, I struggled for a long time to feel a sense of belonging or wanting. This feeling of belonging is complicated. Some days I want nothing to do with academia, and other days I love my time here. A large part of my wave of emotions has to do with the students. I have certain students who see me, a South Bronx Boricua, as an example of the possibilities of what they can become. Other students I have to win over. I have to spend the first weeks of class performing smartness to appease their apprehension of having a Latino faculty of color before them. It's like a never-ending series of job talks to demonstrate that I'm qualified to teach them.
So thank you. That was a beautiful narrative, Dr. Paul Hunter, and I want to encourage everyone to write those narratives, right? To share amongst each other, share with your leadership, and also publish it. As we talk about ethno-racism, we know how racism has existed in our communities. We see it play out amongst our family members with jokes about complexion, don't get in the sun because your skin might be of a darker tone, don't marry a certain person because puede tener pelo malo, and so forth. So racism, especially towards our Afro-Latin, Afro-Latino community is very pronounced, and this has been documented, as you can see here. Now, the frequency and burden is clearly higher amongst our LHS community members of darker complexion, but also with our community members of lighter complexion, you also see discrimination by accent, being subject to slurs or jokes and so forth. So all of these slides, much of these statistics come from the Hispanic Pew Research Center, and we'll be able to share with you after. Next slide. Similar to what Dr. Paul Hunter mentioned, there was a recent article that many of you on this call were able to contribute to on Hispanic identity and its inclusion in the race discrimination discourse in the United States, giving similar narratives to what Dr. Paul Pull Hunter mentioned. One comes from Dr. Roldan, where she states, my family and I migrated. Actually, is Dr. Roldan on with us? Because if she's on, she should read her own quote. And then Dr. Fernandez, I'm going to ask you to read yours, but is Anaida on with us? Maybe not. Maybe Dr. Fernandez, if you can share your narrative, because I think I noticed a comment by you.
Sure. So you would like me to just read my
Yes.
read my narrative?
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. So I am Panamanian and Afro-Latina. I have dark skin. And Spanish-speaking patients have often said, I didn't know you were Hispanic when I would start speaking to them in Spanish during medical rounds. I'm frustrated, and I continue to be frustrated that people think that there's a certain way that all Hispanics look. Yet I can tell that my Hispanic patients do appreciate that I can speak to them in Spanish and that I can identify with the issues that they raise and understand their patient care questions and concerns due to the similarities across our cultural backgrounds.
So I want to thank Dr. Fernandez for contributing, serving as lead author, first author on this article, and joining us today to read her quote. Next slide. We are well positioned. Many of you are advisors in your roles. We are there to serve all of our learners, including our medical students. And in this analysis and brief report published by the AAMC on medical students' perceptions of stress, quality of life, fatigue, social support, and financial concerns, when they stratified the medical students and their responses by race, ethnicity, what was found is that URIM versus white, URIM, which represents Indigenous, African-American, Black, and then LHS plus reported higher levels of stress and lower qualities of life. And these are experiences that many of you have endured. And you're uniquely positioned to talk to the leadership of those experiences and how to afford a different environment for students. That is an opportunity to be a leader and a change agent, and to potentially serve as a senior associate dean of students or education. Next slide. Recently, and this is just sharing another experience, the University of New Mexico School of Medicine did an analysis of clerkship grades of our students' performance in our third year. And similar to other schools, we found that we as an institution were grading our Black, Hispanic, and Native American students with lower scores than their white counterparts. And this came through after analysis of all the data. So basically our URIM students had a lower proportion of honors in comparison to their colleagues. And that has been going on for a while. And that's really multifactorial, but once again, it's an opportunity for us to serve and try and explain why that might be going on. This was not unique to UNM. It's been well published that this was work that has also been undertaken by the University of Washington, UCSF, and other institutions have found similar findings. Next slide. My apologies, this slide is a little bit difficult, formatted incorrectly. But what it's meant to highlight is that, the research is there, which shows that our students often feel like they're not good enough, that they just happen to get in to medical school and they may not really deserve to be there. They're not as smart as their colleagues. And often they'll also comment that it's difficult to find racial and ethnic concordant role models, mentors, and sponsors. Once again, another example of how you are an asset, how you carry many assets, which you can talk about when you go for interviews for various leadership positions. Next slide. So with that, a lot of stats, hopefully just taking a moment to reinforce or remind you all of how important you are to our academic health centers, how I personally want you to all come and apply for positions at the University of New Mexico. And if anyone is interested in hearing more about the positions, please reach out to me. And remember that within the program, there's a section of our program where we list a variety of job openings at our various institutions. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you what you think your assets are. And in speaking to Dr. Paul Hunter, I thought this was such an important exercise. And the reason why is because in my current role as Executive Associate Vice Chancellor, I've had the opportunity to sit on many search committees, as well as at Rutgers and Albert Einstein, the institutions I was at before. And I really think it's a missed opportunity when URM candidates who are African American, Native American, and more specifically Latino Hispanic, because of what we've brought together as a community, during their interviews, don't talk about the unique health issues and disparities in the community, but within our own institutions that LHS Plus individuals face. Also, sometimes they don't talk about how they've been able to be change agents on behalf of the LHS Plus community. Sometimes individuals who I know are bilingual or their first language is Spanish and have an accent, which I think is absolutely beautiful and amazing and has great benefit for our research community and our patient care community, simply don't say anything in Spanish during their interview, not even a hello, a thank you, or make any highlights. And the counter to that, which is really interesting, is instead of people being given credit for a beautiful accent, speaking a second or third language, what comes up on search committees is, did you hear their heavy accent? Could you make out what they said? Do you think that people will understand them at our institution or in my community? And so it just reminds me of a potential missed opportunity when we consider that LHS Plus individuals are now the largest non-white racial ethnic group. And Spanish is the second most common language in this country. That it really needs to be viewed as an asset, and we need to encourage each other to bring it forth during interviews. But with that, I'm going to stop and ask all of you to put in the chat box and to unmute yourself and share your assets.
JP and Norma, while we wait, there's a question. We presented a lot of data today. And so here's the question. I'm curious to see what's going on at the GME level regarding preparing LHS Plus residents for the future career in academia. Would you like to tackle that on?
Yeah, I would say, if you want to know the what it looks like by race, ethnicity, we did release a new report on residents, and we can put that in the chat. That looks at that data. And so there has been a lot of work within the association to think about how do we better support our medical students to improve their, give them opportunities to have better career exploration. And so, resources like Careers in Medicine really help for them to have assessments on their values, to determine based on your values and your interest, what are some potential opportunities, what disciplines make sense based on what you like and what you enjoy. And so I think that's probably the best resource that we have with helping students figure that out. And obviously we have, I should say obviously, but we have also been working with the ACGME, and they have a major program that they launched. It might be going into now its second year, Equity Matters, that really looks at diversity at the GME level, the culture and climate of GME programs, and really helping them figure out, because it is kind of a newer issue. It's in terms of looking at increasing the role of diversity officers within GME programs. So I think that that's something that we're learning much more about and looking at the disparities that do exist across different racial and ethnic groups. So I think that that's definitely on a national level is getting much more attention in the last 5 years.
I would just add that Dr. McDade will be on tomorrow a session with Dr. Acosta and Dr. Kane. And I think that's an excellent question, Dr. Rios, to ask once again, yes, Rios, to ask tomorrow. Also, Dr. McDade is currently seeking a vice president of DI to work with him on evolving initiatives. So all of you, especially those interested in resident and fellow matters, should apply for the position. And not only will be an opportunity to learn what's being done for LHS Plus inclusion, but then you can co-lead on LHS Plus inclusion. And to that also, I'll mention that the chair of the board of trustees of AMA, Dr. Murakala, which if I'm mispronouncing his name, my apologies, will be joining us on Friday. And you will also learn about AMA's efforts to increase LHS Plus inclusion in resident and fellow education.
So this is Pedro. I am concerned, it's great, that we get leaders and deans but do we follow them close enough? Because when you go to bed, you put your head down, do they feel like, it's a burden, because I think we all feel that, but I think we need to make sure that we take care of them at those positions and just not say, okay, this is a win. We now have X number of, Latin Americans or, underrepresented deans. So it really, really concerns me that, we're just looking at numbers, and we need to look at quality also a little bit more carefully.
Would anyone else like to share? Or if not, I am not above going to calling out some individuals.
The only thing I would say is, I think we need some kind of accountability to like the hospital system itself and ACGME programs in academia, especially because there's a lot of, hospitals, located in New York or California, where I am. There's a huge Hispanic community. Not only do we need leaders in medicine and physicians that speak Spanish, but it's a disservice to the community not to have providers who understand their language. Being in the field that I am, whenever I get like a patient who speaks Spanish, sometimes they don't even know the diagnosis that they have. They have active cancer and they don't know what it is. They don't know what's causing it. They don't know the treatment, because in the past they weren't able to have that communication with the provider. So, making sure that those hospitals that have large Hispanic communities or serve those that are a lot underserved are required to have a certain specific of quota, or at least attempt to recruit, minorities. When I was applying for fellowship, I actually reached out to one of those hospitals in New York, and I said, hey, I speak Spanish. This is my community. I would love to be there. I know that you guys need it. And, I was even rejected from having just an interview. So I think just, having some kind of incentive or requirement for them to be like, well, you might not be able to get that many, Hispanic physicians or Spanish speaking, but at least try, show us that you're trying to recruit, not only for bringing diversity to your institution, but also for the better of the patients.
I do think, I know I want to be mindful of the time, because I know we have about maybe we could get 2 more minutes in terms of finishing our conversation, but also to like what I was saying, the assets can also sometimes turn into an opportunity, but also can put a lot of pressure, with our LHS Plus faculty and leaders, because sometimes you don't know Spanish, right? Maybe you didn't grow up in that environment, and there might be a lot of assumptions about, well, you should know the language, and there might be pressures associated with that. So thinking about how all those assets are important, but also how there could be a lot of misperceptions about the Latino community and, what we have to offer. And so, I know we have, I don't know how you want to navigate the rest of the slides, Dr. Sanchez, but we have a few more left if you want to run through them so we could just have an open conversation.
Yeah, we'll go through the next slide. So many of you are aware of the stark disparities that exist by diabetes, high blood pressure, colorectal cancer, obesity, more so liver disease for our community, just another opportunity to lead in ensuring health equity by these various topics. Next slide. And it's imperative, it's really imperative for us to bring forth publications supporting topics of our community. Just want to highlight one more by Dr. Ortega on medical Spanish musculoskeletal and dermatologic education module that was published in Medid Portal to really support Spanish clubs or medical Spanish initiatives that you may have in your institution. How you're teaching those students can be published in Medid Portal. So realize that both Academic Medicine and Medid Portal are excellent journals to publish content related to the LHS Plus community. Next slide. And so once again, just reminding you that some of the benefits or assets that you bring, it's important for you to be aware of or reminded of, I know you're aware of it, but also to discuss leadership is, what is our responsibility now as the largest non-white racial ethnic group? How will we lead? What does that mean? How will institutions address the LHS Plus community given this change? But also, when we lead, it's not a monolithic community. Within our community, there's great SOGI diversity, sexual orientation and gender identity, religion, complexion, and so forth. How will we help institutions achieve their mission and strategic planning? How will we drive their excellence by language equity? Also acknowledging that many of our patients have different migratory paths to our country. We have unique leadership styles that Dr. Acosta will be talking about tomorrow, and the importance of networking through this forum and others to bring others along with us. Next slide. So with that, we just want to leave you with one additional question as we go over the next day and a half or 2 days. What personal or professional questions do you have regarding your career advancement as you aspire to become a full professor, a dean, a vice chancellor, or even a president of a university?
So perhaps maybe we could stop there and turn it back to Juan for questions or comments.
Absolutely. Are there any questions? Anyone want to come off mute and ask a question? Okay, well, while you think, let me just share with you that some of the assets that over the years that I've seen our community bring, in particular into the AAMC, has been your resilience, whether you got into medical school the first time or it took you several times, but you went through the process, you understand it, and now you are supporting your community or our community. The other assets that I've also have seen is your advocacy. You know, you're in the room. Once you're in the room, I'll share with you that the way that I use you all is to place you on committees. And I really try to do that just to really make sure that there is at least someone that is LHS plus in the room. Not to say that we represent the entire community, but it's important for us to be in the room when we are discussing, making decisions, or even just advising. If there are no questions, then I will encourage you to continue throughout the conference thinking about what you are bringing to academic medicine or beyond academic medicine. I will continue to encourage you to develop your networks, connect with each other, and I will continue to really just write down your questions, because this is not the only opportunity that you have to ask questions. There are many other sessions that you are invited to attend and a lot of networking opportunities. So thank you so much for attending the opening session, and I applaud you for being here. This concludes our session. Thank you.